When Among Us was originally released in 2018, the premise of the game was simple, but due in part to the game being promoted by YouTubers and TikTok influencers, attention brought to the game due to these circumstances as well as the COVID-19 pandemic of the early 2020s, the video game became a cultural and gaming phenomenon of the time. But the speculative scenario is this: who or what exactly were the imposters? Even though the concept of Among Us or the premise of Among Us was extraordinarily simple, besides a few details mentioned or depicted within the game, the lore or story for the game itself is basically unknown. Different interpretations of the game had it from a casual gamer's point of view that there was no real story, just work together with others to survive a threat posed by a possessed player or potentially die. From the serious gamer's point of view, there were details of a simple yet interesting story, but what sort of creature exactly were the crew trying to quarantine? What sort of creature exactly the crew were trying to survive against? Or even what sort of creature exactly the crew were trying to escape from. According to Inner Sloth, the imposter was an alien creature who had shape-shifting features that is trying to kill off members of the crew and sabotage various things in the map that the crew might be in during the said game. But besides such basic facts, by popular opinion from players, the entire premise for the imposter is vague. But for casual gamers, nothing more needs to necessarily be known, but for serious gamers, much more needs to be known. However, from information now known, Inner Sloth never desired to explain more about the imposters due to potential concerns that the game might need to be explained further to account for what the imposters really might be, and what that could mean for the game of Among Us. Theories of the imposter can sometimes be entirely within the official premise from Inner Sloth, that it's an unknown alien that somehow got within the area that the crew were residing in when the game started, and have to survive against the creature to ultimately escape from it or work together to potentially kill it. Inner Sloth was actually inspired by the 1982 film The Thing, as the plot of the movie and dynamics of a game of Among Us are basically one and the same. So much like the movie where the thing and other details of the plot were intentionally unknown, the game of Among Us has an alien of unknown origin, and other details pertaining to it are also unknown, which is the entire premise of what the experience is trying to convey to gamers. Theories held that the crew were aliens themselves, defending themselves even on trying to survive or escape from another hostile alien force that desires to sabotage their efforts for whatever reason for the crew to escape or for the imposter to simply kill them all. Theories even conceived of the notion that the crew weren't human at all, but biologically engineered creatures specifically designed for interstellar travel. This came about among details from the facts mentioned in the game that the crew couldn't be of human origin due to the inaccuracies or impossibilities of the game, as when the imposter killed members of the crew, anatomy or features of the crew weren't necessarily correct in relation to a human being's anatomy. Theories of a more alternative nature suggested that there were no aliens besides a few mentions, and due to the whole paranoia that gripped the crew, the so-called possessed individual is actually a mad crew member killing others. Everything that relates to aliens is true, which makes sense in the fact that the Skeld needs severe maintenance due to it being damaged during the insanity that overtook the crew. Theories have held that the maps actually tell the story of the game, with each map pertaining to events depicted in the game, while the official details of the maps to the events is vague and technically only semi-official canon. The lack of details of such have popular opinions being necessarily fact. Polis itself is where the story might originate from or begin with. Something of an alert message or distress signal from the planet is sent from a research facility. Potentially some of the information had facts about the shape-shifting creatures, which were termed imposters because they weren't like the actual crew but impersonating them. A crew of varying numbers is sent upon the spaceship Skeld to the location of the signal. Nothing much else is known. If anything at all, all even as the crew lands at the Polis outpost. The crew finds everything in shambles and disarray, adding to the confusion and even potential fear from the crew that came upon the scene. Due to the details on the map of Polis, it's believed that the original crew found out that a parasitic alien had broken out of a containment and started to kill others. The crew manages to find out that something is gravely wrong and deeply out of their control. Some of the crew are infected and have to be eliminated. Research on repairs are quickly made, with the remaining crew leaving the ship and abandoning the research facility on Polis. Further opinions hold Polis being the homeworld of the parasitic alien, but technically no law or details confirm such a found theory, but it was generally considered popular opinion. Upon the remaining crew returning to the Skeld, some unknown situation occurs which isn't elaborated upon. The ship is partially unoperable and the crew needs to make repairs. It's found out that the sabotage of the ship is made by some of the parasitic aliens taking forms of the crew. In an attempt to stop the crew on the ship, the crew had to survive against the impostors once more while attempting to analyze the results collected from Polis and from what other crew have discovered about the parasitic life forms. From opinions, the medical base ground could determine if the crew in question are actually crew or an imposter, and the sample inspection is further continuing the research begun on Polis. From common sense, the crew are thinned in numbers by deaths relating to the imposters even further, but eventually the ship is repaired and more data is compiled about the imposters. But there's technically no time to go through what had been learned or discovered, as the Skeld continues to make its trip back to Mira headquarters. Once the ship arrives back at Mira, the final members of the crew return to the base, but it is abandoned with no official details or reasons as to why. Common sense here had it that potentially any crew at the headquarters might have heard the distress beacon on pandemonium caused by the crew fighting against the imposters from Polis all the way back to Mira. A final push from the imposters against the loss of the crew to fix and maintain the Mira headquarters, and then once and for all the imposters are finally eliminated as a threat. The lost vestiges which survived the attack by the imposters can finally evaluate what had happened from the Polis to the Skeld ship onto the main base, but the game conveniently ends before the player could have truly made sense of what had occurred.